The galaxy's deadliest assassin collapsed at his feet, and the human chose mercy over chains. Ethan Ward never imagined his life would turn this way. As a young diplomat representing Earth on a neutral space station, his biggest concern had always been learning alien etiquette and not offending powerful neighbors. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, a small voice among civilizations that had ruled the stars for thousands of years. Ethan believed his duty would be paperwork, quiet negotiations, and perhaps a few speeches no one really listened to. Instead, he found himself sitting across from three very serious council members who had just told him that he was now married to the alien queen of one of the largest empires in the galaxy. At first, he thought it was a mistranslation. The council often struggled with rendering human languages correctly, and Ethan was sure someone had made a mistake. He laughed nervously and asked for clarification. But when the alien interpreter repeated the statement with no hesitation, Ethan realized it was not a joke. A formal message had been received from Empress Sarilith, ruler of the Kareen Dominion, and it clearly named him, Ethan Ward of Earth, as her chosen consort. The words were sealed with the Empress's personal mark, and such declarations could not be withdrawn. Ethan's first instinct was to refuse. The whole thing sounded absurd. He had never met the Queen, never spoken to her, and only knew fragments about her people from cultural briefings. Why would she choose him, a human with no status or power? The council explained with grave expressions that refusal was not really an option. The Kareen were proud and ancient, and such a public proposal was a binding pact. To turn it down would not only insult Sarilith but might also be taken as an insult from all of humanity. For a species so new and vulnerable, the consequences could be catastrophic. Earth's fragile foothold in the galactic community might collapse before it even began. Sitting in the cold chamber, Ethan felt the weight of 1 billion lives pressing down on his shoulders. He was no hero, no legendary figure, only a man doing his duty far from home. Yet at that moment he understood he could not simply think of himself. Humanity had taken its first uncertain steps into a vast universe, and those steps were now tied to his decision. Slowly, reluctantly, he gave his answer. He would accept. He would be the consort of Empress Sarilith, even though he had never seen her face. The news spread across the station within hours. Aliens of many species whispered in the markets and corridors. Some laughed at the idea of a fragile human becoming husband to the insectoid queen. Others shook their heads in disbelief, wondering if this was a clever human trick or a desperate gamble. When messages reached Earth, the reactions were divided. Some praised Ethan for his courage, calling him a symbol of survival and diplomacy. Others called him a pawn, accusing the Galactic Council of forcing a young man into a role he never asked for. Ethan read none of the news reports. His thoughts were fixed on the strange, uncertain future ahead. Days turned into weeks, and preparations began for his new role. He was introduced to alien advisors who explained the customs of the Kareen court. Their society valued loyalty above all, and their concept of marriage was not only personal but also political, a bond that shaped alliances and shaped empires. Ethan studied their history late into the night, memorizing stories of queens who had ruled for centuries, of dynasties that had risen and fallen with each carefully chosen bond. He realized that Sarilith's choice to select him, a human, was not random. It was bold, perhaps even dangerous, and it carried meaning he did not yet understand. Despite his confusion, Ethan approached the task with determination. If humanity was to survive among the stars, he could not afford to appear weak or foolish. He asked endless questions, not just about ceremonies and etiquette, but about the values that shaped the Kareen. To the surprise of his alien instructors, he even began learning fragments of their clicking, humming language, practicing until his throat ached. The sounds were difficult for human vocal cords, but he persisted. When he managed to form a proper greeting, one of the instructors bowed with unexpected respect. It was the first sign that perhaps, just perhaps, he could succeed in this impossible role. Yet at night, when he was alone in his quarters, Ethan wondered what kind of person the queen truly was. Was she cruel or kind? Would she see him as an equal, or only as a symbol? He tried to imagine her appearance from the descriptions he had read. Tall, regal, with shimmering plaits of dark chitin and eyes that glowed faintly in low light. She sounded nothing like a human woman, and yet there was something fascinating about the mystery. He wondered what had made her choose him out of all the diplomats in the galaxy. Did she see something in humanity that others did not? Or was he only the piece of a larger game he could not yet see? Ethan knew one thing for certain. His life was no longer his own. Without ever meeting her, he was now tied to a queen who ruled over hundreds of worlds. The decision was made, the bond sealed, and his path was set. Whether it ended in triumph or disaster, he had stepped into history. And as he lay awake beneath the dim lights of the space station, he whispered a quiet promise to himself. He would not regret this choice, not if it meant giving humanity a future among the stars. Ethan's life on the station changed quickly after the announcement. Where once he could walk the markets unnoticed, now every pair of eyes followed him. He was no longer just a human diplomat. He was the chosen consort of Empress Sarilith, and that made him both a curiosity and a symbol. Some aliens offered respectful nods, others whispered behind his back, and a few glared with open suspicion. Ethan had expected ridicule, but what surprised him most was the strange mix of fascination and fear. It seemed no one knew quite what to make of him, and perhaps that was what Sarilith had intended from the very start. Each morning, Ethan's schedule was filled with lessons. The Galactic Council had arranged for advisors from the Kareen Dominion to instruct him in their customs, their expectations, and their language. The lessons were difficult, sometimes exhausting. The Kareen way of life was filled with rituals that touched every part of existence, from how one greeted a superior to how one shared a meal. Their culture valued symbols of loyalty and patience, often shown through long, deliberate ceremonies. To Ethan, who came from a fast-moving human, society had felt slow and heavy at first, but he forced himself to focus. He knew every gesture mattered, and a single mistake could cause insult. One evening, after a long day of training, Ethan sat with one of his instructors, a thin alien named Karoth, whose voice clicked like the tapping of stone. Karoth explained that for the Kareen, a consort was more than a companion. The bond, Karoth said, is sacred. It is not about beauty or desire. It is about the merging of strength, of heritage, of trust. The Empress has chosen you not for what you are, but for what you represent. Ethan thought about those words long after the lesson ended. He wondered if Sarilith had seen something in humanity that the rest of the galaxy had overlooked. Despite the weight of his new role, Ethan did not shrink away from learning. He asked questions about everything, their history, their wars, their legends, even their lullabies. His teachers grew frustrated at times, but many began to admire his persistence. When he stumbled through his first attempt at speaking their language, producing a clumsy but recognizable phrase, his instructors were startled into silence. No human had ever tried before. The sound was rough, but Karoth bowed slightly and admitted, "You learn as one of us." That small recognition gave Ethan courage. Messages from Earth reached him often, but they brought little comfort. His parents wrote of their pride, though Ethan could feel the worry hidden in their words. News broadcasts from Earth debated endlessly over his marriage. Some praised him as a hero securing humanity's place among the stars. Others painted him as a captive of alien politics. Ethan tried to ignore the voices, choosing instead to focus on his studies. Deep down, he knew the opinions of Earth mattered less than the trust he needed to build with Sarilith's people. Without their acceptance, humanity's alliance would crumble. The first time Ethan was allowed to see the Empress, it was not in person, but through a shimmering holographic projection. The chamber lights dimmed, and the air shimmered as her towering figure appeared before him. She was unlike anything he had imagined. Her body glistened with iridescent patterns across her chitin, and her 4 golden eyes studied him with calm intensity. Ethan felt his breath catch, not from fear, but from the weight of her presence. She radiated power and authority in a way No human leader ever had. Ethan Ward. Her voice echoed, smooth but layered with an alien resonance. Do you accept the bond as more than duty? Will you walk beside me as partner, not as prisoner? Ethan swallowed hard. Every instinct told him to be cautious, but instead he chose honesty. I accept, Empress, he said, his voice steady. Not because I was told to, but because I believe humanity can learn from you. And I hope your people might learn from us too. For a long moment, Sarilith was silent. Then one of her mandibles curved in what Ethan realized was the Kareen version of a smile. Honesty, she said. Few dare to speak so directly to me. Perhaps the council was wise to bring you here. The projection faded, leaving Ethan staring at the empty space where she had stood. His heart pounded, but there was a strange warmth in his chest. He had faced the Empress, and she had not dismissed him. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's connection with Sarilith deepened. They spoke again through projections, sharing fragments of thought and culture. She asked about Earth's stories, and he told her of explorers crossing oceans, of humans who dared to step onto the moon, of families who survived hardships by relying on each other. In return, she spoke of her ancestors who had united the Kareen, of the long traditions that shaped her empire, of the patience required to rule over countless worlds. Though their forms were so different, Ethan began to see a thread of similarity. Both their peoples had learned to endure by holding together. Still, not everyone approved. Whispers of resentment grew louder among certain nobles of her court. Some called Ethan unworthy. Others questioned Sarilith's judgment. Ethan was aware of their doubts, but he did not let them break his resolve. He knew that every respectful bow, every correct phrase, every thoughtful answer was a stone laid in the foundation of trust. And trust, he believed, was stronger than any wall. At night, alone in his quarters, Ethan often thought about his strange situation. He had never asked for this life, but somehow it had chosen him. He had never seen Earth from this far away before, never felt so responsible for its future, yet in his heart, he knew he could not turn back. He was bound to Sarilith now, not just by a treaty, but by a growing understanding. She was more than a symbol. She was a leader who had risked her own reputation to choose him. And for that, he silently promised he would not fail her. Ethan had grown used to speaking with Sarilith through messages and formal channels. But the day came when their connection became direct. The council chamber was prepared with advanced holographic projectors, able to bridge light years in an instant. Ethan waited with his hands folded, his heart racing. He knew he was about to see her face to face, or at least as close to it as possible without leaving the station. The air shimmered, and suddenly, she was there. Empress Sarilith's image filled the chamber, tall and imposing. Her armor-like plates caught the light with a faint shimmer, and her eyes glowed softly with a golden hue. Around her form moved smaller attendants, but Ethan's focus stayed locked on her. It was strange to look upon someone so different, someone whose body bore no resemblance to his own, and yet to feel no fear. Instead, he felt a quiet curiosity, as if he had been waiting for this moment since the day he accepted the bond. For several seconds there was silence. Sarilith studied him, her gaze steady, her body still as stone. Finally she spoke. Her voice came through the chamber with a deep resonance, calm, yet carrying the weight of command. Ethan, Ward of Earth, we meet at last. Ethan stood, his palms sweating, but his voice steady. It's an honor, Empress. She tilted her head slightly. Do you see now what you are bound to? Do you fear me? Ethan thought carefully before answering. He could not lie, not to her. I don't fear you. I don't fully understand you, but I want to. Fear won't help either of us. A quiet ripple of sound came from her attendants, a reaction Ethan did not fully understand. Sarilith's eyes remained on him. Many tremble before me, even my own nobles. You do not. Humans are strange. He almost smiled. We've been called worse. For the first time, her mandibles curved faintly, the Kareen version of amusement. That small moment broke the tension, and Ethan felt himself breathe easier. What followed was not a lecture, but a conversation. Sarilith asked about Earth, not its armies or its politics, but its stories. Ethan spoke of explorers who sailed into unknown seas, of scientists who studied the stars long before they could reach them, of families who built homes in harsh lands because they dreamed of a better future. He did not pretend humanity was perfect, but he showed her the strength that came from persistence and hope. In return, Sarilith told him of her people. She described the long climb of the Kareen from fractured tribes into a vast empire, of how their survival depended on loyalty and unity. To them, a promise was not words but a bond of honor. To betray it was to lose all worth. She spoke with pride, but also with a weariness that surprised Ethan. He realized that even for an empress the burden of rule was heavy. As they talked, Ethan noticed something unusual. Her voice, though commanding, softened when she asked him questions. She did not treat him as a mere symbol, but listened as if his answers mattered. He remembered Karath's words, that a consort was more than a companion, more than a partner. Perhaps this was the beginning of something deeper. Their conversation stretched longer than expected. At last, Sarilith leaned slightly closer to the projection. Ethan Ward, when I chose you, the council believed I did so for politics. They believe you are a tool to strengthen alliances. But I tell you this now. I chose you because your species defies pattern. In less than 2 centuries, you rose from reaching your own moon to standing among the stars. Where others see recklessness, I see something else. Possibility. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He had expected duty, maybe suspicion, but not this open admission. Then I'll do my best to prove your choice wasn't wrong, he said quietly. Her golden eyes shone brighter. We will see. The projection flickered, and she was gone, leaving Ethan alone in the chamber. Yet he no longer felt the same uncertainty. For the first time since this strange journey began, he felt as if he had truly connected with her. Word of their meeting spread quickly. Many alien dignitaries were surprised the human had not embarrassed himself. Others whispered that perhaps Sarilith saw something no one else did. Ethan ignored the gossip. He was too busy studying, preparing for more conversations. Each time he spoke with her, he felt the walls between them grow thinner. She asked more questions, sometimes even about him personally, his childhood, his family, his dreams. He told her the truth, that he never sought greatness, only purpose. Meanwhile, on Earth, the debates grew louder. Some politicians argued that Ethan was being manipulated, that he was surrendering humanity's freedom. But others pointed out that humanity had never been closer to real influence in galactic affairs. Ethan knew the truth was somewhere in between. He was not a prisoner, but neither was he free. His life now carried a responsibility larger than himself. One evening, after a particularly long discussion with Sarilith about human art and music, Ethan sat alone in his quarters. He realized that he no longer thought of her as just a distant queen. She was beginning to feel real to him, not as a symbol of duty, but as a person. That thought startled him, but he did not push it away. Perhaps, he thought, this strange marriage could be more than survival. Perhaps it could become something genuine. He closed his eyes, hearing again her steady voice, her careful words, her quiet curiosity. Without meeting her in person, without touching her hand or seeing her beyond the shimmer of projection, he felt a bond forming. And as unlikely as it seemed, he did not regret it. Ethan quickly learned that being the consort of an empress was not only about speaking with her, it was also about proving himself before her people. The Kareen nobles were proud and cautious. Many did not trust the idea of a human standing so close to their ruler. To them, Ethan was fragile, untested and unworthy of such a bond. Some were polite in public but whispered doubts in the shadows. Others made no attempt to hide their disapproval. The first challenge came during a formal gathering held in the Great Hall of the station. Nobles from the Dominion arrived in tall, glimmering forms, their bodies decorated with ornaments that reflected their rank. Ethan walked into the chamber wearing a simple robe given to him by the council. Though it was plain compared to the jeweled attire of the Kareen, he wore it with dignity. He bowed in their fashion, holding the gesture longer than necessary, to show respect. Some nobles murmured approval, but others remained cold. One of them, a broad figure named Xylar, stepped forward. His voice echoed sharply through the hall. "Human," he said, "you claim loyalty to our queen. But what strength do you have? You are not of our blood. You have no wings, no armor, no claws. How can you protect what is sacred?" Ethan felt many eyes on him. For a moment he wondered if silence would be safer. But then he remembered Seralith's words about honesty. He lifted his head and answered calmly, "You are right. I have no wings or claws. My people are not strong in the way yours are, but we have survived because of other strengths, our minds, our bonds with each other, and our will to keep going when everything tells us to stop. I cannot fight as you fight, but I can stand beside the queen in a way no one else can. That is why I am here." The hall grew quiet. Some nobles scoffed, but others studied him with new interest. Xylar's eyes narrowed. "Words are easy. Actions show truth. You must prove yourself." From that moment on, Ethan was tested in ways he never expected. The nobles did not challenge him with battles or combat. Perhaps they knew such trials would be pointless for a human. Instead, they created tests of wit, patience, and understanding. In one trial, he was asked to listen to a long poem written in the Kareen language, then repeat it in full. The sounds were harsh and complex, but Ethan had studied hard. Though his voice faltered, he completed the recitation, earning a ripple of surprise from his judges. Another time, he was given an ancient riddle. How could a weak creature defend itself against a stronger predator with no chance of winning? The nobles expected him to fail, but Ethan thought for a long while before answering. A weak creature survives by being clever. It does not fight the predator on its own terms. It makes alliances, learns to use the world around it, and turns weakness into strength. Humanity has faced predators stronger than us, but we are still here. That is our answer. Some nobles laughed, but others nodded slowly. One even whispered that perhaps the human consort was not as foolish as they believed. The greatest test came when Ethan was placed before a council of elders and asked to share something from his own people. He thought for a moment, then began to tell them the story of early explorers who crossed the oceans of Earth. He spoke of small wooden ships, fragile compared to the storms, and of sailors who faced the unknown because they dreamed of what lay beyond. He described how they mapped new lands, survived disasters, and carried their people forward. "We are not the strongest species," he said, his voice steady, "but we are the species that keeps walking into the unknown. That is why we are here, speaking with you today." The hall was silent when he finished. The elders spoke quietly, among themselves. Though none openly praised him, Ethan could sense a change. For the first time, the nobles looked at him with curiosity instead of disdain. Later, when Ethan was alone, a small message arrived from Seralith herself. It was only a single sentence. "You have done well. You are beginning to show them why I chose you." The words warmed him more than he expected. He realized that every test he endured was not just for him, it was for her as well. If he failed, her decision to choose a human would look like weakness. If he succeeded, it would strengthen her reign. He carried that thought with him, and it gave him strength. In the following weeks, he noticed subtle changes. Some nobles who once ignored him now offered formal greetings. Others asked questions about Earth, cautious but curious. Even Xylar, who had spoken against him, gave him a long stare that seemed less hostile than before. Ethan knew acceptance would not come quickly, but the first stones of trust had been laid. At night, he reflected on how far he had come. When he first heard of the marriage, he had felt like a pawn, a man forced into a role he could not escape. But now he understood that he had a choice, not about the bond itself, but about how he carried it. He could be a symbol of fear, or he could be a bridge between two worlds. Slowly, he felt the second path becoming real. And though the challenges were far from over, Ethan found himself smiling in the quiet of his quarters. Without realizing it, he was no longer surviving each day, he was beginning to belong. Ethan's progress among the Kareen nobles was slow but steady. Each day he proved in small ways that he was not the weak outsider many had imagined. Yet just as the court began to soften toward him, trouble began to stir. Whispers of unrest reached his ears, rumors of a rival faction plotting against the Empress. The Kareen dominion was vast, with countless worlds under its rule, and not all were pleased with Sarilith's decision to bind herself to a human. Some saw it as a threat to tradition, others as a sign of weakness. At first, Ethan tried to ignore the rumors, focusing instead on his studies and his conversations with Sarilith, but soon he began noticing patterns others seemed to miss. Certain nobles avoided eye contact during meetings, while others spoke with unusual sharpness when the Empress's name was mentioned. In one gathering, Ethan overheard two advisors speaking in hushed tones. He could not catch the words, but he recognized the tone of secrecy. Something was happening and no one seemed willing to admit it. One evening, as he sat alone with Karoth, his instructor and now his closest confidant among the Kareen, Ethan asked directly, "Is there danger to the Empress?" Karoth's body shifted uneasily, his wings brushing against the floor. "It is not for me to say," he replied, "but power attracts envy. You must understand, human, that your presence has unsettled many. There are those who would rather see the bond broken." Ethan felt a chill. He was no soldier, no spy, but he could not sit idle. If Sarilith's enemies succeeded, it would not only endanger her rule, it would place humanity itself in peril. Their fragile alliance depended on her survival. He decided to act even if no one believed him. Over the next few days, Ethan watched more carefully. He began keeping notes, marking the movements and words of those who seemed uneasy. It was not much, but humans had always been good at noticing the small details, the hints others ignored. And slowly, a picture began to form. He realized that several nobles who publicly supported the Empress were secretly connected, meeting in private when they thought no one would notice. When he felt sure, Ethan requested a private channel to speak with Sarilith. Her golden eyes appeared before him, calm as always. "You seek me at an unusual hour," she said. "Yes," Ethan replied, his voice low. "I have reason to believe there is a plot forming against you. Certain nobles act with too much secrecy. Their movements are not natural." Her gaze sharpened. "You are not trained in court politics. Why should I trust your suspicions?" Ethan held her stare, refusing to look away. "Because I see things differently. Your advisors know your court too well. They overlook small signs because they believe they already understand everything. I don't. I notice what feels wrong, even if I don't know why. And right now something feels wrong." For a long moment Sarilith said nothing. Then her mandibles curved faintly. "You speak boldly, and perhaps you are right. I will look into it." The next day, Ethan received word that his warning had been correct. A group of nobles had been planning to challenge Sarilith's authority during an upcoming council meeting, using ancient law to declare her unfit because of her choice of consort. They had intended to move swiftly, but thanks to Ethan's notice, Sarilith was prepared. The plot was revealed and the nobles forced to step down. When Ethan heard the outcome, relief washed over him. But what surprised him most was the personal message that arrived soon after. Sarilith herself had sent it, written in formal Kareen script but translated carefully. "Your watchfulness has saved more than my throne. It has reminded me that trust is not given by tradition but earned through action. You have earned mine." The words struck deeply. He had not thought himself capable of protecting an empress. Yet, in his own way he had. Not with weapons or armies, but with attention, intuition, and honesty. Qualities humans often overlooked in themselves, but which now mattered more than ever. The next time they spoke, Sarilith was different. Her voice carried the same authority, but beneath it was a softer tone. She did not speak to him as a distant queen, but as a partner. "You see what others miss," she told him. "Perhaps that is humanity's gift. You are not blinded by centuries of tradition. You remind me of the strength in change." Ethan felt warmth spread through him at her words. He realized then that their bond was no longer just about duty or politics. Slowly, trust had grown between them, as real as any promise. But even as his confidence grew, Ethan knew the danger was not over. The failed conspiracy had only been one attempt. Others would come. The Kareen were proud, and many still doubted him. Yet he also knew that Saraleith no longer saw him as a symbol forced upon her. She saw him as someone who stood beside her, willingly, ready to face the storms ahead. That night, as Ethan sat in his quarters staring out at the endless stars, he thought about the path his life had taken. Without ever meeting her in person, he had already risked everything for the Empress, and strangely, he felt no regret. Instead, he felt a quiet certainty. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it, not just for himself, not just for humanity, but for her. The day finally arrived when Ethan was called to the Kareen homeworld. For months he had spoken with Saraleith only through projections, their bond growing across distance. Now, he would at last stand before her in person. The journey was long, the kind that made many humans uneasy, but Ethan felt no fear. Instead, he carried a quiet anticipation. He wanted to see the world she ruled, the people who questioned him, and the queen who had chosen him long before he understood why. The ship descended through thick clouds that shimmered with hues of green and silver. The Kareen world was vast and alive, its skies filled with winged creatures and its cities built like great spires rising from the land. Towers of crystal and metal gleamed in the sun, connected by bridges that stretched across dizzying heights. Ethan stood at the viewport staring in awe. Earth had its wonders, but this world seemed ancient, carved by centuries of order and strength. When the ship landed, he was greeted by a line of attendants. Their bodies shone with bright markings, and they bowed deeply in the traditional style. Ethan returned the bow as he had been taught, holding the pose long enough to show respect. The attendants led him through vast halls where walls glimmered with carved patterns that told the history of the Dominion. Ethan could not read them, but he felt the weight of centuries pressing in around him. At last, he was brought to the grand court. It was larger than any space he had ever stood in, the ceiling so high it vanished into shadows, the floor polished to a mirror sheen. Rows of nobles filled the chamber, their jeweled forms glittering in the light. All eyes turned toward him as he walked, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silence. For the first time, Ethan felt the full measure of what it meant to be the Empress's consort. He was not just a man, he was a symbol standing before an empire. And then he saw her. Saraleith sat upon a great throne at the far end of the hall. She was taller than he expected, her form gleaming with iridescent patterns that shifted with every movement. Her golden eyes glowed softly, filled with a calm power. Though he had seen her image many times, nothing compared to her presence in person. She was regal and commanding, yet there was also something steady, something almost comforting in the way she regarded him. The chamber was silent as Ethan approached. He bowed deeply, as was the custom, his heart pounding. When he lifted his head, Saraleith rose from her throne and descended the steps with slow, graceful movements. The nobles watched in hushed silence. When she reached him, Saraleith paused. For a long moment she studied him as though weighing the worth of all humanity in his single form. Then, to the shock of the entire court, she extended her hand. It was a gesture unheard of in Kareen culture, where physical touch was reserved only for the most sacred bonds. Ethan, understanding the weight of the moment, did not hesitate. He reached out and placed his hand gently in hers. A murmur rippled through the court. Some nobles gasped, others shifted uneasily, but none dared speak. Saraleith's voice rose above the silence, steady and strong. "Here stands Ethan Ward of Earth," she declared, "my chosen consort, not by tradition, not by force, but by bond. From this day he is not an outsider, he is of the Dominion." Ethan felt a surge of warmth in his chest. He had worried for so long about whether he belonged, whether he was worthy. But in that moment, standing at her side, he realized he no longer doubted. Whatever he had been before, whatever others might say, he was now part of something larger than himself. The ceremony that followed was long and filled with ritual. Ethan repeated vows in the Korean tongue, his voice unsteady at times but clear enough to be understood. Sarilith spoke in return, her words ringing through the chamber with unshakable authority. At the end, the hall filled with the resonant sound of Korean approval, a low rising hum that echoed like music. Later, when the chamber was empty and the crowds gone, Sarilith stood with Ethan in a quieter hall. For the first time, there was no projection, no distance, only the two of them. She looked down at him, her eyes thoughtful. "You carried yourself well," she said. "Many doubted you would. Today you silenced some of them." Ethan gave a small smile. "I just tried to be honest. That's all I've ever had to give." Her mandibles curved faintly, the Korean sign of approval. Honesty is a rare gift in a court of power. Perhaps it is what we need most. For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of ceremony behind them, the future ahead. Ethan realized then that he did not regret a single step that had brought him here. Against all odds, without ever knowing what it would mean, he had agreed to marry an alien queen. And now, standing beside her at last, he felt only certainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would not face them alone. Ethan had never thought life could change so quickly. Only a year ago he had been just another man on Earth, unsure of his future. Now he stood beside Sarilith, Empress of the Korean Dominion, as both her consort and partner. The galaxy no longer looked at him as a stranger. They looked at him as proof that humans could stand with the oldest powers in the stars. The first days after the ceremony were not simple. Some nobles kept their distance, whispering their doubts in hidden corners. They believed Ethan's presence would weaken Sarilith's rule. Others feared that humanity would bring trouble into their careful order. Ethan could feel the eyes of doubt wherever he went, but he had grown used to it. What mattered was the bond between him and Sarilith. She had chosen him openly, and that trust gave him strength. Together they began their duties. Sarilith invited him into the council chamber where great decisions were made. At first, Ethan listened more than he spoke, studying the politics of the Dominion. The Korean valued hierarchy, tradition, and careful words. Ethan was not a man of many formalities, but when he finally did speak, his plain honesty surprised the council. Instead of twisting language to hide meaning, he spoke directly, and though some found it strange, others began to appreciate the clarity. One such moment came when the council debated an alliance with another species. The Koreans spoke in circles, discussing honor and protocol, avoiding a decision. Finally, Ethan leaned forward and said, "You already know what is right. If you wait too long, fear will decide for you." His words were simple, but they cut through the noise. The council fell silent. For the first time, they looked at the human not as a guest, but as someone whose insight could matter. Outside of politics, Ethan discovered the rhythms of Korean life. He walked through the crystal streets with Sarilith, visiting markets, where traders from across the stars brought strange foods and tools. He learned the sounds of their music, the flow of their celebrations, the meaning behind the glowing patterns on their skin. The more he learned, the more he realized that the Korean were not so different from humans. They had families, hopes, and fears. They sought meaning in their lives. Sarilith, too, grew curious about Earth. She asked him about oceans, mountains, and the taste of fresh fruit. Ethan described summer evenings, laughter at family gatherings, and the beauty of stars, seen from a quiet countryside. Sometimes, when she listened, her regal calm softened, and he could see not just the ruler but the person behind the crown. But their peace did not last without challenge. Rumors spread of factions that disliked the union. Some claimed that Sarilith had broken sacred customs by taking a human consort. Others whispered that Earth would demand too much in return for giving so little. Ethan knew they could not ignore these voices. To prove himself, he needed more than words. The chance came when a crisis struck. A mining colony at the edge of Dominion space faced a disaster. Its energy core was failing, and evacuation seemed impossible. The council hesitated, fearing the cost of sending aid. Sarilith was prepared to act, but Ethan stepped forward first. "I will go," he said. "Let me help them." The council was stunned. A human volunteering to face danger for Kareen lives. Some thought it foolish, but Sarilith supported him. Together they traveled to the colony. Ethan worked side by side with Kareen engineers, crawling through narrow tunnels, using his own ideas to solve problems they had overlooked. Where Kareen training pushed them to follow rules, Ethan's quick thinking found new paths. His courage and resourcefulness saved the colony, and the people saw him not as an outsider, but as someone willing to risk everything for them. When they returned, the whispers of doubt grew quieter. Even the nobles who had doubted him began to nod in silent respect. Sarilith watched it all with calm satisfaction. She had believed in Ethan from the beginning, but now the Dominion itself began to see what she saw. That night, when the stars stretched endless across the sky, Ethan stood on a balcony beside Sarilith. The city below glowed with lights, alive with voices. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "Leaving your world for mine?" Ethan looked at her, at the queen who had once been only a distant image and was now the center of his life. He shook his head. "Not for a moment. I didn't just marry a queen. I found a partner. I found a home." For a long time they stood together in silence, the galaxy wide and uncertain before them. Yet in that quiet moment, Ethan knew he had no fear of what was to come. Humanity had a place among the stars, and it had begun with him, without ever meeting her. He had agreed to marry the alien queen, and now, standing by her side as both consort and companion, he knew the truth. He had never once regretted it.